old lion is back in action, and he's starting us out strong in 1951. Freddie Beshore found himself a fourth-round TKO victim at the hands of the superior Lewis. Beshore's nose was bleeding, and he had a bad cut on his left eyelid. Good stoppage. It's time for undisputed champion Ezzard Charles' sixth title defense. Lee Oma was a 6-1 underdog, and for good reason, as he was ultimately stopped on his feet in the 10th. Referee Ruby Goldstein stopped the fight before it may have ended by knockout. Even with Charles losing rounds 5 and 8 due to low blows, he was firmly ahead on points. A sensational bout that had the small crowd roaring is on deck. Bob Satterfield engaged Elkin brothers, resulting in a second-round TKO behind 3 knockdowns in favor of Satterfield. Such a good look was it that Satterfield was eyed for an MSG main event. It would happen in 2 months' time. While technically this is the second fight between Ezzard Charles and Joe Walcott, I'm going to deem it the birth of something beautiful. What I mean is that it's the 1950s birth of a timeless four-way rivalry that can be likened to the fabulous Five Kings of the 1980s. The third man in the rivalry, you may have guessed it, is the Brown Bomber Joe Louis, who has fought both of these men. The fourth man in this rivalry will enter next year. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So, Charles won the first time around to become the NBA titleist and stake his claim to the lineage. Remember, Walcott was a top 2 heavyweight with Charles. Charles wound up beating Lewis to secure an undeniable claim to the lineage, as we saw last year, and Jersey Joe has the opportunity to claim the undisputed crown again. He fell short twice against the Brown Bomber last decade. Can he avenge his loss to Charles and redeem his quest of age? In short, unfortunately not. Despite appearing to do enough for the win as a 5-1 underdog, Walcott dropped a unanimous decision to Charles for the champion's 7th title defense. It was the 4th unsuccessful attempt by Jersey Joe to win the title, who, by the way, was the first man to ever challenge for the title at least twice and never win it. Charles, the champion, dropped Walcott in the 9th round. The crowd sided with Walcott's claim he'd been robbed, booing their disapproval of the decision. If you're familiar with history, and I should have said this back in the 90s timeline, Walcott's quest of losing title opportunities but never wavering reminds me of big bounce back Frank Bruno. Perhaps they will share in common that they never gave up and did capture at least a portion of the title. Perhaps. We've got a hidden gem on deck here. Bob Satterfield was a 9-5 betting favorite, and it looked to be for good reason when he dropped Rex Layne in the first. Layne rose and ultimately notched a TKO in the 8th behind a knockdown of his own right before the referee stepped in. Quite the upset and quite the downer for Satterfield in his big opportunity. The IBC looked to set up a rematch between Jersey Joe Walcott and Rex Layne, but Walcott chose to fight Ezzard Charles again for the title. Maybe things will be different this time for old Jersey Joe. After willing his way over Freddie Beshore, Joe Louis decisioned Omelio Agramonte a month later. 16 days after that, he TKO'd Andy Walker. That was 3 months ago, and Louis is once again up against Agramonte. It's another decision win in the bank for the Brown Bomber. Louis decked this man in the 2nd round. Chapter 4 of the Ezzard Charles-Joey Maxim rivalry. Well, I don't know about rivalry, considering Charles has won them all, but I digress. The last time they fought, Charles decisioned Maxim right before going on to become the heavyweight champion. This is a huge opportunity for Joey, given this is the de facto most important of their affairs. Unfortunately for him, Charles continued the shutout and won this bout by unanimous decision for his 8th title defense. Better luck next time, Joey. The Brown Bomber returns. Originally, this bout against Lee Savold was supposed to take place 2 days earlier, but rain postponed the bout twice at the Polo Grounds, so they moved it indoors to Madison Square Garden. The fight was all Joe Louis, ending in the 6th when Joe knocked his man out. This fight was ultimately very significant for the title picture because back when Ezzard Charles beat Joe Louis, every sanctioning body except for the British Boxing Board of Control, or BBBofC, recognized Ezzy as champion. They chose Lee Savold, and when Louis obliterated their man after having decisively lost to Charles already, they finally recognized Charles to further stamp home that he was undisputed. Big time fight, in hindsight. Finally televised is the Brockton blockbuster. In his first filmed fight, he knocked out Rex Layne in the 6th round. The knockout drew fame for its delay. Layne was blasted by an overhand right and after a delayed response collapsed to the canvas on his face and rolled over to take the count on his back. It was an upset, given Layne was an 11-5 betting favorite. Here's a description of how brutal this bout was. Rocky bloodied Layne's nose and mouth, cut him above his left eye, knocked out 2 of his teeth, and smashed his bridge work. That consists of teeth he'd already had done, perhaps prosthetics. Marciano is for real. Holy shnikes. Just 4 months after their last bout, the Cincinnati Cobra and Jersey Joe are back at one another's throats. Fans were beginning to complain about the lack of competition in the division by this point, and to be honest, the first 2 bouts between these two were dull for the era. Maybe this comes down to how masterful of boxers they were. Maybe not. You decide. One thing is for sure, Ezzy has a reputation to overcome for being a boring and safe fighter. Will that happen tonight? The crowd was all for Walcott, the 9-1 underdog, and in his 5th attempt to capture the heavyweight title, he finally did it. And the manner by which he did it is something history will never, ever forget. Into the immortal halls of boxing lore does Jersey Joe Walcott go for strolling into the champion as if he were on a walk in the park and lashing out with what may be the nastiest left hook of all time. The only other punch that comes to mind to match this one is the 1990 walk-in left hook by George Foreman over Jerry Cooney. Funny that old George comes up during this event. You'll see why when we get to 1994, way down the line. Back to the present. As the life left Charles and his title reign, it soared in Walcott and heavyweight boxing fans. The old lion had finally made his dream reality. Jersey Joe Walcott, at the ripe old age of 37, was the new heavyweight champion of the world. He now held the record for being the oldest man to ever capture the title and would for the next 40 plus years until another great did it. All the bad luck, all the robberies, all the grinding had culminated in the ultimate. With the division firmly in the hands of Jersey Joe, another sense of panic had to set into the minds of fight fans. An old man is the heavyweight champion, and though he isn't boring like the previous champion, what credibility can the division hope to maintain? He may retire soon or lose the title to a nobody in a sudden decline of ability at the hands of Father Time. The point is, the division needs a young, charismatic face, and there isn't one apparent. At least not for another 3 months. Returning to action 2 months after his last bout is that old lion, Joe Louis. He's up against Cesar Brion again. The first bout yielded a unanimous decision for the Brown Bomber, and so would this one. Brion absorbed a good deal of punishment, of which probably would have ended many other men. He battled a busted up face and grogginess to make it to the final bell again. Credit where credit is due. This one was a lot more decisive than the first. Joe Louis is certainly still formidable. Tuning up before the return bout with Jersey Joe, Ezzard Charles hit the comeback trail strong by stopping Rex Layne in the 11th round. It was in the same ring he lost the title in. Both men were looking to bounce back from recent losses. Charles was decked in historical fashion by the new champion Walcott, and Layne was knocked out in 6 by the Brockton Blockbuster. At least Layne had the saving grace that he had a victory over the current champion. Maybe that counts for something regarding the contender standing. Layne also said that Charles should take Walcott the next time around. Is the changing of the guard on hand? Is this the passing of the torch? Or is this merely the baptism to be of an overhyped bum? The legendary Joe Louis predicted that he would knock out Rocky Marciano. At 37, he has to battle against the young Dynamo and Father Time. Before this, he decisioned contender Jimmy Bivens and was on a mighty win streak of 8 since losing to Ezzard Charles. And speaking of which, how could this be the passing of the torch when that already happened last year when Charles beat Louis? Perhaps because Charles was never considered the People's Champion? Perhaps. Maybe also that sitting champion Joe Walcott also isn't the People's Champion, even though he may have been robbed of a win over Louis back in 1947. All that said, Rocky Marciano isn't necessarily viewed as a great heavyweight either, but he does have the excitement tagged to his undefeated name. To some at the time, there may have even been a racial element to things in that he was the great white hope. I'm doing the quote fingers right now. To each their own. Believe what you will. This fight today is viewed as a facade of sorts due to Louis's advanced age, but did you know that the Brown Bomber was a 6-5 betting favorite over the Brockton Blockbuster? Again, he'd won 8 straight and appeared to still be formidable enough at his ripe age. Well, whose day was it? Rocky Marciano, in the biggest fight of his career up to that point, crushed the remnants of Joe Louis's career, banishing him into retirement for good. No, seriously, it was further signified by the fact that Marciano knocked Louis through the ropes after Louis rose from an earlier knockdown. This all occurred in the 8th round. Well, if he wasn't on the radar before, he for sure is now. Louis hadn't been knocked out since Max Schmeling did him in way back in 1936. He would not get the opportunity to avenge this loss as he did the one against Schmeling because this wound up being his career twilight. 66 wins against 3 losses with 52 knockouts. Let's be real anyway. Would he have any chance at winning a rematch anyway? The real question is how a bout would go between these two at their best. Now that is a question to behold. Who do you believe would win? Why and how would they get the job done? I look forward to your answer. This was the twilight of Joe Louis's career. He never fought again professionally, and why would he with any chance of a big payday gone? He fought his last exhibition on December 16, 1951, and hung up the gloves for good. From there, he got into pro wrestling and worked as a referee across wrestling and boxing. All this to pay off the debt he owed the government. Perhaps this tale as a whole is worthy of its own video. The torch has been passed, even if no one quite knows it yet. The 5th and final chapter is upon us. Ezzard Charles may not be the champion anymore, but he still holds 4 victories over Joey Maxim's head. In their final meeting, he would make it 5. Talk about overkill. Maybe the ex-champ needed this one to get back on track. We've seen other fighters across history do the same. The comeback trail continued on for the Cincinnati Cobra. He would have a final tune-up 9 days later, knocking out Joe Cahat in 8 rounds. (1951) has come and gone. These are Ring Magazine's top 10 heavyweights. Well, Jersey Joe Walcott has made history and is the new man to beat. It was conclusive too. A knockout is ironclad. I suppose the only question is if there will be a rematch to determine if it was a fluke. My 1951 upset of the year is Walcott over Charles for the title. The manner in which Jersey Joe finally overcame Charles is hard to top. Yes, Rocky Marciano was the underdog against Joe Louis on paper, and it was a good win, but I think Walcott's holds a little more weight. Ring Magazine selected the 8th round of Louis Marciano as its round of the year. Marciano's banishing of Louis into retirement in real time was devastating, but remarkable nonetheless. Ring Magazine recognized Jersey Joe Walcott's shocker over Ezzard Charles for the title as its standard for the year. The walk-in, the punch, the collapse of the champion, it's elementary. The BoxingPedia Fighter of the Year was tricky. Process of elimination between Jersey Joe and Ezzard Charles eliminating one another leaves me with Rocky Marciano. The Rock won all 7 of his fights, the last being a historical career-ending knockout of Joe Louis. On December 11th, the now 18-year-old Cleveland Big Cat Williams made his return to boxing with a second-round KO. The crown rests on the head of the old man Jersey Joe, and the question of contenders outside of Ezzard Charles and now Rocky Marciano still remains. Is the title scene set to be exclusive to a small group of guys, or will it expand? Only time will tell. Let's move forward.